Ghost stories seem to be a staple here on the Swamp Dweller channel. Over the years, I have been sent thousands of stories from people all across the globe who have allegedly encountered unexplainable and absolute strange phantom phenomenon in their home or workplace. This episode is going to be highlighting some of those stories sent in over the years. As always, if you have a story of something you would like to share on the Swamp Dweller channel here, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Now, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, and get ready for these creepy and strange ghost encounters.
My name is Kylie, and I was 16 when this happened. It was the most terrifying day of my life. I had just gotten my driver's license and was very excited to be able to drive to my friends. We were finally going to be able to drive alone, her and I, without any adults in the car. I decided to go on a trip with my two friends. We were so excited to go on a girls' day road trip. We heard about this old, abandoned, and possibly haunted house about 4 hours south from Salt Lake City. We all jumped at the chance to go. It was on a Friday the 13th, so we thought we would get some good stuff. Well, I guess we were right. I was concentrating on the road while my friends were in the back giggling and painting their nails. I've been driving for about 3 hours already, and it was starting to get dark. I'm not going to lie, I was getting really nervous. I've never really driven in the dark, but I refused to tell them that. I was so excited to get there, and annoyed that I couldn't join in the fun in the back seat. After another hour, we were about 30 minutes away. We were now in a forest area in the middle of nowhere. I was going faster than normal, wanting to get there. I was staring at the road, when out of nowhere, there was a black figure in front of my car. Thinking it was a person, I slammed on the brakes, causing the nail polish to go flying everywhere. I was holding onto the steering wheel so tight my hands were turning purple. The black figure just stood there. I just couldn't seem to look away. I slowly turned my head to look at my two friends. They were staring wide-eyed at me, and then back at the road. We were all silent and scared out of our minds. I slowly turned my head to come face to face with a monster. It had red eyes. Its arms hung so low, I couldn't even see them. Its head looked like it had been through hell. It didn't have a left eye. It only had one red eye. This figure was so tall, I had to move forward a little just to see this thing's face. I didn't even know what to think. My mind was blank, and it was staring right at me. It had blood-covered fur, and I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. I took a good 5 minutes of staring at this thing before I finally got the nerve to move. I sped up as fast as my car would go, and raced down the street before crashing my car into a tree. I had a few broken bones, ribs, and an arm and a foot. But my friends, they had bad injuries, from one going into a coma to one actually even passing away. I was the only one that wore a seatbelt. I'm the only one that remembers what happened that night. And the last thing I remember was a dark laughter. This was the last time I drove at night or in the mountains alone. I'm always going to have that night in my mind. I'm never going to forget what happened.
I live in a nice neighborhood in Pearland, Texas. The neighborhood is only about 18 years old and still in good condition. To my knowledge, there is nothing historical about the land it was built on. My house has always had an ominous and uneasy vibe to it. Not really good or bad, just foreboding in a way. I've never seen anything scary to think this, at least initially. On bright sunny days it just felt dark, cold. Tonight was different though. I got home from work to see my dad and dog just chilling. My mum was still at work. I'd went into the kitchen to say hi to my dog and pet him. Eventually I snuck into the bathroom to sneak some selfies and put them on Snapchat. Upon walking in I noticed my brother's DS charging in the bathroom, which I found odd as he never leaves it outside of his room. I take my selfies and then walk down the hall. Noticing the blinds are open in my grandma's room and she's sleeping, I tiptoe by, go to my room. On the way, noticing my brother's door is closed, which means he's home, as if he isn't, he leaves it cracked for us to see he isn't in. I'm checking my views on Snapchat when I hear what I believe is my brother's footsteps down the hall, which are distinct as he always sounds like he is banging his heels hard on the floor when he's walking down the hall. 2 minutes later, I get a text from my dad asking if I left the oven on. Not thinking, I ask him why he would ask me that if my brother just went down the hall and towards the kitchen. There was a moment of silence, at which point I got up to see why no one replied to me. I see the kitchen light is off and my dad is still chilling. I tell him I heard my brother coming down the hall. It wasn't me when I hear his response. It gives me chills. He tells me my brother isn't home, at which point I laugh nervously and tell him I just heard him going down the hallway, and Grandma can't get up without assistance of some kind, so it couldn't possibly be her. So now I am standing there looking at an oven that's set for 350 degrees, and my dad staring at me every bit as confused as I am when I hear a loud banging on the door. I jump only to realise it's the UPS guy delivering a package at the same time all this weird shit is going down. What the hell was going on? Some things to note about the whole situation. My dad was on the couch half asleep watching Star Trek. My grandma's immobile. My dog started whining when I talked to Dad, but he didn't whine when I heard footsteps. My brother's DS was charging in the bathroom and he never leaves his electronics out when not home. He also leaves the door open enough for us to know when he's not home. I never touched anything in my kitchen except my dog who was in his playpen. So what was it I had heard? I don't wish to call it a glitch, but I didn't quite wish to say it's paranormal as I've never seen anything in my home. It's felt weird in the house at times, but that's it. Sometimes I see my dog acting weird in the backyard and I wish I could somehow ask him why he's acting that way. I may never get real answers, but I am open to suggestions.
I am originally from Houston, and as I reached middle school, I was introduced to the occult due to the fact that I believed our house was haunted. It always had a sense that you were being watched, and occasionally, my mom and I would see shadows in the hallway. Nothing could prepare us for the future. I'm a single mom of 2 beautiful children, and we are a close-knit family. After a bitter breakup with my daughter's father, my parents invited me home with open arms to live with them. My daughter has autism and the mentality of a small child, but she is my baby nonetheless. In 2014, my dad had to retire early due to a near-fatal heart attack, at which point we moved to Central Texas for a slower pace of life. Each property in the new neighborhood was an acre of land, or a bit more like ours each. On the other side, next to the plot of land, is a community park with some woods in the background. Of it gives you a real horror vibe to it. The neighborhood, being nice and new, I'd often hike with my 4-legged baby JJ, who is a rescue from Houston. 2 weeks after moving into our new home, my dad came in one night as he is a smoker, as am I sadly, and the 2 of us went out back to smoke. My dad pointed out some wild deer running around, and I sat in awe at the sight of them. One night, my dad and I were outside, watching the deer in our yard when my dad went in after he heard my mom calling him into the house to help with dinner. I stayed just a few more seconds before I reached for the front door, but I stopped when I heard a mandolin voice say, "Hello." Turning my head to see where the voice came from, I replied, "Hello?" A chill went down my spine, all of a sudden, and I began to feel as though I was being watched, at which point I went inside. A few nights later, I was reading in my room about visualization when I heard 3 knocks on my bedroom door. "Come in," I said, thinking it was my dad or my son at the door. I soon spoke up louder because my dad can't hear too well, due to his hearing being practically dead in one ear from a childhood injury. 3 more knocks came at the door, so I got up and opened it. There was no one there, so I thought maybe my son was messing around, since his room is practically only a few steps away. Exhausted, however, I turned in for the night. The next night I heard 3 more knocks at my door once again. This time I went straight for the door, but once again, there was nothing there. I checked my son's room, however. He was out cold. I then checked on my daughter, but she was also fast asleep. Deciding it was nothing but my imagination, I brushed it off and went back to my room. The second I closed my bedroom door, there were 3 knocks once again, which seemed to be coming from all around the room. It was in this moment I knew we had a problem, and being a practicing Wiccan, I knew something needed to be done about it soon. I ordered several supplies online from an occult store. I bought black salt for the border of our property, some sage, oil, sea salt, new feathers, and of course, the shell. As I waited for my supplies to be shipped to me, I knew I needed to cleanse the place. The knocking continued for days, but one night it went way beyond that. I woke up to a burning sensation in my back, so I ran to the bathroom to confirm that I already believed to be true. I'd been attacked by what I believed to be was a demon, and now had 3 long scratches on my back. It felt like someone took hot knives and scraped them on my back. As soon as my supplies came in, I blessed them all. The next morning I laid black salt oil along our property line. As I prepared my ritual bath, sea salt helps cleanse any negative energy off you, plus a couple of black candles and a white pillar candle on the middle of some lavender. This helps me in visualizing negative energy coming off me. I heard my daughter scream. She ran to her grandma saying a mean man was at her window tapping on it. My dad rushed out, but he found nothing. While my dad was checking out back, a knick-knack that was my great-grandmother's flew off the shelf and almost hit my son. Seeing this, I went to finish my bath and started the ritual. Starting with my room, I went through the house saging every inch of the house, demanding the evil to leave my home, and letting it know this was our home and it wasn't welcome here. I was determined to get rid of whatever the hell this thing was, and I even laid sea salt in our windows, as well as in each of our bedrooms. A week later, I saged the house again to be safe. In time, the house began to feel cleaner, the air felt lighter, and everything just went back to normal. That was until 6 weeks later, when all of our smoke alarms went off simultaneously, and even after my dad and I removed the batteries, 2 of the alarms were still going off. I soon performed another ritual, and all seemed fine until my son came home from walking one of the dogs outside and told his grandma about something he had heard. He was scared to death, and as I came home, JJ needed to go out, so I put a leash on him and took him out. As we walked, JJ stopped dead in his tracks and began growling while trying to pull me towards the house. I assumed it was coyotes he heard or sensed, but as I took a couple of steps, I heard the loudest growl that I've ever heard. This growl didn't sound like an animal I'd ever heard. It seemed more like a monster than anything, and it was enough for us to really hightail it out of the park. JJ was so scared he literally went into our room and was shaking. I told my mom what I heard, and she looked as the blood drained out of her face before telling me what my son had heard previously. We've decided it's time to move. I am somebody who spends most of their time outdoors, and I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So of course, when I decided to go to college, I had to keep in mind that having some decent woods nearby was a must. Upon checking out a couple of places, I decided to go to Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania, or just the borough. The biggest place about going to that university is that my Uncle Fred lived up there and was a well-known name in the community. He owns to this day a framing shop right in the middle of a small town area. This was a huge plus, knowing people like that always equals more land to put spots in. That's all I really needed to pick the college I was going to go to. Edinburgh is really cool because there are a lot of old buildings and strange flat landscapes as compared to the hilly land around Pittsburgh. So it was cool to have to figure out how to scout the game I'd be going after once the season started. My main hunting area was directly behind my uncle's house. He has a beautiful log cabin that sits back off the road with woods on all sides of it. It was a true thing of beauty. When he had the house built, he actually had the gigantic chimney made of flat stones that were found in the woods behind the house. More on that later. As I was scouting the area for the first time, I came up on a few different circles of boulders in the middle of the woods. They were definitely very old. The boulders were quite big, much too big to just be moved for some reason like a group of guys camping out. They must have taken 10 men to move them. and only if they had some kind of pulley system or something of the sort. There were also smaller rocks, and when I say smaller, I'm talking like somewhere around 300 pounds or more, making inner circles inside the large boulders. It was really crazy. I found a total of 7 of these throughout the whole property. Some of the rocks that were now part of the chimney, they simply had to be with the amount of rocks he used on it. Oh, also these rock circles also made a much larger circle around the woods. After a few more days of scouting with my buddy Brandon, we were sure we had our spots picked out for the first day of archery. We couldn't wait to get out there. It was a perfect day too. It was just perfect, it was great. The thing about Edinburgh, Pennsylvania, is that it gets more snow per year than most of Alaska due to the lake effect snow coming across Lake Erie. What happens is before the lake freezes completely over, the snow, which is warmer than the air, pushes the clouds way up into the atmosphere, too high for them to actually snow due to the low temperature all the way up there. The clouds then come inland and fall back toward Earth. It takes them about 20 miles to do this. Edinburgh is about 20 miles from the lake. You see what I'm saying? Anyway, on the first day of archery, which is in the first week of October in Pennsylvania, there was a thin layer of snow. This is perfect for archery because you can see the deer in the woods much more easily, and you can also see if any animals left any tracks. If they did, they were fresh since the snow didn't happen too long before that. We had been sitting in our tree for roughly 2 hours or so, and not one of us had seen anything yet. I had just got off the radio with Brandon, whom was on the other side of the property, when I seen some movement over to my right in the pine thicket. I then see a branch move a little bit and seen 4 deer legs under. I readied my bow in my stance so as to make a clean shot at the deer. Around 15 feet up in a tree, I did this very carefully. About a minute later, I was looking for any movement. I lost the 4 legs inside the thicket. This was expected due to the fact that the deer were probably feeding, so this would be common for them, so I waited for them to return. Maybe around a minute later, I caught movement again. It looked as if the deer would break through the thicket into more open woods. The moment I've been waiting for. As I brought the bow up into full draw stance, I was stunned by what I was seeing. Where the deer should have been, there was a man. A strange looking man at that. This absolutely should not have been. If there was a man anywhere near where the deer had been, the deer would have been long gone, spooked back into the thicket. I put my bow back down onto the hook. I screwed into the tree and left my binoculars to my eyes. At only around 35 yards away, I could now see a great deal of his physical appearance. He was rather rotund, with his belly leading the way, a white long-sleeved shirt with ruffles down the middle of it, just like a pirate shirt. It was tucked in, thick, with canvas brown pants, with pants being tucked into white socks directly below his knees. Further down, where his shoes should be, was absolutely nothing. He had no feet whatsoever, no calves, no shins, no shoes. With my wide open eyes, I could see nothing. Instead of walking, he seemed to float through the woods, going from left to right. This is when I started noticing other extremely strange things about him. I looked through the binoculars at his head. It was cocked back with his chin resting on his lower neck, his very large red bulbous nose in the air, and a bit of a sort of snobby overall look. The hair, though, was covered by a wig that judges in England wear, a white wig with 3 curls on the side. I noticed he didn't just seem to glide through the woods, but he was legitimately floating. His arms stayed stuck at his sides and unmoving as he traveled. He also never looked down. The way his head was cocked, he would have only been able to look upward. This is not how any person or animal walks in the woods, constantly looking down and around for obstacles that you may trip over. All of this happened within a time period of maybe 20 seconds or so. He had come out of the thicket behind a medium-sized oak tree, and then he hit the next oak tree. He never came out from behind it. I watched in absolute astonishment for another 5 minutes, waiting for him to break his cover so I could see him again. But this never happened. I told Brandon what had happened, and he was immediately freaked out, but he did make fun of me. I don't think he really believed me. I told him he won't be laughing when the deer thing comes after him. Anyways, I have no idea what that was, some kind of forest spirit or what. Maybe you guys in the comments can let me know. I'll start by telling you a few things about me. I'm 18 years old and live in northern Canada, in 2 different homes. One is with my father, who lives right in the middle of 222 acres of woods. We've got but a single neighbor, who is situated about 1 kilometer away. My second home is with my mother. She lives on the edge of a city, close to the woods and the main shopping center. The story is split into 3 parts, and believe me, it may sound crazy, but I swear, all of this is true. The first part of the story starts at my father's house. I'd often go for walks in the woods. It was peaceful and quiet. I'd always bring my 3 dogs for protection, a German Shepherd and 2 Australian Shepherds. Nothing ever happened in the woods. There was the occasional sighting of bears, and we found quite a few lynx tracks, but nothing out of the ordinary. Until something started watching me from the woods. A black figure of sorts. At first, I thought it was just my paranoid mind playing tricks on me, so I shrugged it off. A few days passed since I first felt the strange watching presence. It was a cold day out. The sun was gone and the wind came from the north, making it even colder. It was around noon, and it was time for me to bring the dogs out for a walk. I brought them down to the road that leads to my house. Nobody was around and it was silent all over, except for the wind blowing through the tree leaves. I was calm, but then it felt like I was being followed. Of course my dogs were following me, but this feeling was dark. I continued and eventually turned back to go home. Everyone was gone, so I arrived to an empty house. As I was about to bring the dogs into their kennel, I noticed one of the Aussies was frozen in place. He was staring into the woods. I tried to get his attention, but he would not budge. I walked over to him, pat his head. He only growled, but not to me. He growled to whatever was in the woods. The dog was pacing, tail tucked between his legs and ears held back. That made me feel a little uneasy, since I had been feeling watched or followed during the walk. It also meant I wasn't the only one who felt it. I decided to be safe and locked the door when I was inside. I'd like to say this feeling left after a while, but no, it only became more frequent. I had to lock and cover my windows at night because it felt as though someone was peering through them. I told people about it, especially those I lived with. They'd tell me it was a bear or maybe some ghost. A few even mentioned that it could be a stalker. I knew it was neither of these things. It just didn't feel right. Fast forward to about 3 months after the first occurrence. It's September, and the weather has begun to get colder. I was outside with my dogs cleaning some skulls I had recently gotten from a trapper. I was just minding my own business, all of my family members were gone, so I was left alone again. Then, I went near the forest and felt the dark presence again. It was so strange. I just couldn't shake it off as nothing. Scared, I went inside and decided to make myself some food in the comfort of my home. The fear left, and I felt safe again, until I heard the dreadful sound coming from the woods outside. It sounded like a man screaming, a deer howling in pain, and the low growl of a bear, all at once. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard in my life. I checked all the doors and ran to the second story of the house to hide. I'm not sure why I felt so much fear, since I heard nothing after that, but I called a relative, and they told me I was just hearing things. That night, I could barely sleep. I was afraid of whatever this thing was going to come inside. I kept seeing things in the shadows of the trees after this incident. It was hard to ignore. Eventually, I went to live with my mother in the city. I was there for a better chance at a job. I also had some friends to reunite with there. Once I moved, I met up with my childhood best friend. She and I decided to take a long walk in the chilly temperatures of the night. We talked and talked. Nothing happened until about 11:30. We were crossing the street when I heard the same exact sound, but much louder, coming from the woods down the road. I was terrified. My friend, though, paid no attention to it. We continued walking, but I was a little more paranoid than before, just waiting for something to jump out after me. An hour passed and we had to split ways. She went home and I did too. I had some instrumental music playing on my phone to keep me calm. Obviously, that didn't last long. Of course, something had to happen in the dead of night while I was alone. As I walked in the streets, I heard a baby scream, but it didn't sound normal. It was a horrifying, distorted scream. I looked in the direction of the sound and thought I saw someone there. My feet moved faster than before, trying to get me home. Then I heard another scream, much scarier than the first. I ran for it. That might not have been the best decision, but it was instinctive. Suddenly, I heard feet hitting the pavement and felt like something or someone was chasing me. I looked back quickly and thought I saw a large black figure coming, but it only lasted several seconds till I saw nothing. The shouts and screams did not stop though. I finally got home, but I realized the door was locked and couldn't get inside. Unfortunately, those screams continued. After many calls and pressing the doorbell, my stepfather opened the door. I was a hyperventilating mess, but I got through it. I'm very spiritual, and I've been told by many mediums or spiritual leaders that I am a beacon for bad spirits. I assumed that it was a bad spirit, but I remember reading about wendigos, a creature that is apparently connected to me in some ways that are unknown to me. I did research again and deeply believe that whatever followed me is still watching me. I'm not sure if it's a wendigo, but it could be. Some acquaintances agree that it is quite possible. Now I'm just waiting for my next encounter with it, and I'm left wondering, what does it want, and what will it do next? About 10 years ago, I befriended a lovely woman that I shall call Jade. Jade, like me, was quite interested in the paranormal. Our reasons were different though, as she, having lost a son, was curious in life after death. I, having felt ghosts my whole life, wanted to hone my craft more. Jade had just joined a ghost hunter society in our state, and was interested in starting her own local chapter. She was hopeful to gather a group to hunt in eastern Washington. She was in need of a sensitive for her new assembly, and was very interested in my abilities. I didn't consider myself that experienced, but knew I had some ghost-feeling talent, yet needed practice. Jade felt I should start with her house for some practice. Since she and her family first moved in to that house in the 1900s, there had been some activity. The activity increased after remodeling, and old pamphlets from the KKK had been found in her wall. She hoped some long-dead racist was not haunting the place. Luckily, the haunting seemed playful, almost childlike in nature. She did not feel that could have been her deceased son. She and I felt he was too busy enjoying his time in heaven with loved ones. We didn't speak of him too much or how he passed. I never wanted to press her for any details and possibly upset her. I could see that she was still quite broken-hearted over his loss. She lived about 2 hours away from me in a tiny little town. Her dark green, white-trimmed house was adorable. It resembled a small Victorian cottage. It was a 2-story with a gingerbread trim front porch surrounded by big shade trees that must have been planted as the house went up. Even the lilac hedge on the side was so old it had grown to more of a line of lilac trees than a hedge. I loved this little place and wanted it for myself. She took me on a tour of her sweet place to see if I could pick up anything. I did not pick up on a presence any place in the house or the usual feeling of being watched. Strangely, What I did continually see was what paranormal activities the family had witnessed in the past. She took me up the narrow wooden stairs to 2 cute bedrooms tucked under the eaves. At the top of the stairs was a funky little cardboard door built into the wall. I told her that I felt something had happened with that cupboard and baby clothes. She opened it to show me that it was now empty, but a few months before, it had stored many baby clothes and items. Her and her husband had been gone with the house locked up, only to return to find every item in that cupboard had been tossed down along the stairs. I asked her if her large palm plant in the corner of the living room ever shook, and she told me that yes, especially during the renovation. I also knew that the kitchen had been added on and a spirit at one time had been seen walking out the back door. She confirmed that yes, her husband saw a person walk through the back wall. I could actually see she used smudge bundles across the house, and she knew that she had been cleansing. I felt that the renovation had stirred up a few souls, but honestly, they seemed gone now. Hopefully the KKK pamphlet left in the wall was to hide it away at some long time ago, though personally I think they should have burned it. We decided to go ahead and take a walk around the yard and garden. I just sensed old growth and beauty. I pointed out some heirloom flowers that she didn't know she had. I loved the garden, and I admired the large trees and lilac hedge up close. We walked along the front of the house, then I started up the driveway that ended at the back of the house. Jade was following me, and as I got halfway up the driveway, it hit me. The pain in my chest and crippling, heartbreaking emotion that overcame me still makes me cry to this day when I think of it. My hands immediately went to my heart and I began to sob. These were overpowering sobs that I have never experienced in my life. All I could mutter was, "What happened here?" I turned and Jade stopped me and also sobbing. "I'm so sorry," she choked. She took a deep breath and said, "This is where Liam died, her son." I ran to her and held her in that driveway, both of us tears streaming. She was trying to apologize to me, but I wanted so badly to comfort her. I could tell at this point that she was feeling a lot of pain, and his physical pain at the time of her agonizing heartbreak. The poor grieving woman had to walk me shaking into the house, sat me down and gave me a beer and cigarette. She explained to me that a few years earlier Liam's baby brother was in a parked car in the driveway, and it began to roll down. Liam ran behind it trying to stop it, and it killed him instantly. We sat and gathered our thoughts and emotions for a while. I was not prepared to feel that. I assured her that Liam was most likely not earthbound. I didn't know I had the ability to feel something like that. I was shaken to the core. It took me over an hour to calm down. About half an hour into the drive home, my throat began to swell and hurt. I did not feel well at all. I pulled over to call my best friend and tell her I was on my way home and was okay. I knew she had been worried about me and my hunting for ghosties. When she picked up and I tried to talk, I had lost my voice. Only horsey squeaks came out. It took me a few attempts to finally get her to understand that I was fine, only coming down with something. I made it home and proceeded to get so ill. It was one of the worst and only cases of bronchitis I had ever experienced. My chest burned and I could not speak for 2 weeks. It took a lot of antibiotics to recover. I just know that the cause of little Liam's death was a sudden, large tear in his heart muscle. I just don't know if it was so sick from feeling this pain or the pain of his mother's loss, or if I just didn't know what I was getting into. That is definitely going to be my last ghost hunt though. I have been part of a paranormal research team for several years. Each weekend, we go to a new location in our town that is said to be haunted. I will try to be very specific about what happened during this investigation the best I can, but if you have any questions, feel free to comment them below. This story starts with our most recent investigation. We were at a very old, very haunted cemetery in our town called Jordan Cemetery. When we first got there, it was still light outside. We weren't very creeped out. We even felt comfortable enough to split up for a little while. And then, things started happening. I was walking around the back right corner of the cemetery when I felt someone come up behind me and wrap their arms around me. I thought that it was my boyfriend, who was also a member of our team, so I smiled and turned around. But when I turned, no one was there. We had split up and my boyfriend was all the way across the cemetery, along with the other 2 members of our team who were at different ends. I started getting really scared and went back to our meeting point. When we got back together, it was getting very dark We went over to sit on a bench near one of the graves, when suddenly, my boyfriend and I saw a shadow duck behind a tree. We got up to investigate, and just as we got 10 yards away from the bench we were sitting at, I turned around and saw a small, black shadow figure running towards us. I started freaking out and pointed it to my team. All of us saw it at the same time and started backing away, but we managed to keep our cameras on it and catch it on film just as it started to fade away. Once it faded, we stayed for a little while to see if it would return, but it never did, so we turned and walked away. About halfway across the cemetery, we got a very off feeling and stopped in our tracks. We stayed in the same spot, dead silent, until a woman's voice broke the silence. It said, "Right now, there is a..." and the rest was unintelligible. My team and I went nuts. The voice was loud enough to be caught on our cameras. Just as we calmed down, we heard a very loud music right next to us. We started turning around and looking for the source, and then I realized that I recognized the song. It was Somebody to Love by Queen, and it was coming from my iPod, which was in my bag and had been shut down completely. How it could have been turned on and started playing music by itself is unexplainable. We started cheering and thanking the spirit for letting its presence be known, and just as we stopped, we looked up to see a large black figure of a woman standing across the graveyard from us, only to disappear, and we got a very weird, uneasy feeling and left to go to our next location, which was another cemetery. There is still a running funeral home next to it, so I'm going to leave out the name. We didn't stay here for very long, and not much happened except for this one incident. I was walking with my team and a random song popped into my head. I had never heard the song before, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. I thought things were going fine, but the next thing I knew, I was halfway across the cemetery from where I had originally been. My whole body was tingling and my team was yelling to me to snap out of it. I asked what had happened, and they told me that I had totally zoned out and had started singing an eerie sounding song, and was staring off into the distance and wandering away from them. My boyfriend also mentioned that my eyes were very dilated. At first, I thought they were pranking me and I didn't believe them. I didn't want to believe them, but they swore on their lives that they were telling the truth and had gotten a glimpse of me on camera when I had just started singing the song. I took part in my first ghost hunt for Halloween last year. I will try to recite my experience as best I can, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask. The location was at a hotel and bar that has a reputation for being active. The building still trades at a hotel, so I will leave it unnamed. Suffice to say, we had permission from the owners before going ahead. I am a confirmed believer, but have never sought to seek out the paranormal in any way, so approached the event apprehensively but open-minded. The event was a real eye-opener, and the story I would like to tell occurred during one of the vigils we held during the night. I will start with a quick layout of the area. Beneath the hotel runs a series of tunnels and rooms which make up the cellar. At the far end of the cellar is a narrow tunnel which is used as the barrel run for the bar. We were told that ordinarily this room would be stocked with beer barrels, but on this night it was empty. It was in here where we decided to hold our vigil. The first thing we noticed on entering the barrel run was the cold temperature compared to the rest of the cellar. This could be put down to the time of year and the fact that the run has a metal door that could be opened to drop barrels down, which could allow cold air in. The area also had a very strange atmosphere, which it hadn't had when I visited earlier in the night. Turning our torches off, we weren't in total darkness due to moonlight shining through the barrel drop doors with an emergency exit light. We created this energy circle and called out for any presence to make itself known. We were awarded a soft tapping at the end of the corridor, away from the barrel drop. We ruled out pipes as no visible pipes ran through this part of the cellar, and the main pipe run was on the completely opposite end of the cellar. We had explored that area earlier in the night, and it is behind a heavy wooden door which blocks out most of the noise. We had an interesting experience there, which saw a member of the group run out at high speed. Anyway, back to the tapping. We called out again for the tapping to be repeated, and it was, still faint and in the same location. One of the group pointed out a strange shadow that had appeared in the open doorway, which joined the barrel run to the rest of the cellar. This was at the same end of the tunnel the tapping had been coming from. We all turned and every member of the group agreed that they could see a shadowy figure at the end of the corridor. From where I stood, the shape of the body, shoulders, and head could be seen clearly. We were the only group in the basement at this time, but shouted out to see if it was someone who had lost their group. We got no reply, but the shadow appeared to move in our direction. We called it again, encouraging the figure to approach us. It didn't, but it did stay in the same position before disappearing. It didn't fade or walk away. It was a case of being there 1 minute and then gone the next. We moved out of the main barrel run into a side room of the barrel run that was used for storage of an old bar furniture. The doorway we used was the only entrance. Away from the two sources of light we had before, this room was pitch black with the torches off. The moment we walked into the room, the atmosphere became very heavy, and to me, it felt hostile. Other members of the group later confirmed that they felt unwelcomed in the storage room. We created a circle around the old table and called out for anyone present to make themselves known. One of the groups facing towards the back of the room said they could see red lights flashing. Great, that's the way my back was facing. Calling out again, we asked if he, the feeling we had was that it was a male spirit with us, could do anything else. The sudden loud noise of wood scraping across stone caused a few screams and numerous torches to be switched on. The table we had circled had visibly turned slightly. All members of the group denied accidentally touching the table, so we turned our lights off and asked if he could do it again. The feeling we got was the entity was a male, and the same person who we had seen as the shadow earlier. The feeling we got was the entity was a male, and the same person who we had seen as a shadow earlier. We waited, and apart from red lights flashing at the back of the room, only seen by the same person as earlier, nothing happened. So we asked, if you want us to go, do something to show us or we will not leave. This was quickly followed by the unquestionable sound of coin bouncing and settling on the floor behind me. We quickly turned our torches and went to go investigate. The only thing I found that could have explained the noise was a 10-pence coin. This could have been there before we had entered, but it was very distinct noise. Taking that as our cue, we left the room and ended our vigil.
For the longest of my life, I didn't know that I had any Native American in me, but I do. I'm in a very backwoods part of Arkansas. I own and work with my dad on a 1,000-acre farm. The farm next to mine has these big Indian burial grounds. The burial grounds are only on one part of the farm, so this happens to be the one part of the farm that my father and I have to rent from the owners of that farm. I've never worked in the field before until this year, and I have a feeling it's going to be my last in that field. I was cutting hay about 2 weeks ago, and my tractor was acting up. This is a brand new tractor we just bought, and around 7:30, it started acting like it wanted to stop, which is not normal at all. I got off the tractor and turned it off, and that was my first mistake. When I got off the tractor, I heard the cows from my farm begin to stampede and call out as if something was trying to kill them. Naturally, I wanted to go see what was wrong, but my tractor wouldn't start, and I will say again, brand new tractor. Now, most people would probably just go back home and get help or a tow truck. That's not my case scenario, because where my farm is literally on the last stop of a 17-mile drive, so nobody's coming for me, and for some reason, my phone isn't working. It's just gone dead. I looked to the field to my left and looked to the field to my right, which is normally filled with cattle, but nothing this time. I began to feel a cold chill around me, which I suppose was normal because it started to rain. Then I caught a smell in the air, which I suppose is normal due to the cow pat, and the field I was working in was relatively close to the dumping site, so I just thought it was the wind. At that point I began to walk back to the road. That was my second mistake. I could hear something in the woods, but I thought it was the normal deer or wild hogs. But then I heard my dad yelling my name, which I suppose wasn't much of a surprise, as I've had the tractor off for quite a while. I guess he wanted to see what was going on. I thought it was my lucky break. So I began to call and go towards him, telling him that the tractor wouldn't start and I'm freezing cold and can he come out to get me? I got no reply. I then stopped and I went back to set up on the tractor and stayed up to see where he was. Then I saw it. My dad's truck, a dime's worth of a mile away, heading over the levee to the other side of our farm. There was no way he could just have been calling me, and he wouldn't leave me out in the cold. My mind began to race. I watched way too many Skinwalker stories, and then I heard it. It sounded like a pig snorting, and then it ended with a mixture of a mountain lion roar and a horse neigh. I bolted for the neighbouring farmhouse, even though they weren't home. The rain is pouring down on me. My straw hat just basically turns flopsy. I'm an 18-year-old looking like a snivelling 9-year-old child. The neighbours' doors were locked, so I had nowhere to hide but under the house. Not even looking for snakes, I bolted for the one entry point. My glasses were starting to fog up, so I couldn't see very well at all. All I saw was something going across the Indian battlegrounds, towards my tractor, and then on top of it. Then, it let out a violent roar. I'm still scared. I'm still cold. But thankfully, I don't live on the farm anymore. But unfortunately, the house I'm living in the city was also built on an Indian burial ground. So it's only a matter of time before he comes here too. I think the cause was me cutting hay on the Indian burial ground. It had been excavated a long time ago, but I guess whatever it was, didn't want me up there. And I won't go back again, at the very least not there.
I and my friends are really into scary stuff like horror movies and ghost stories. And of course, we love to visit reportedly haunted places, just to challenge ourselves for fun. So, there are these vast pine forest areas up on a hill situated about a 3-hour drive from where I live. Rumor has it that the forest is haunted. Many years ago, some poor people decided to end their lives there by jumping off the deadly steep cliff known as the Bow, as it resembles a ship's bow. People who live nearby have often reported sightings of ghostly body parts scattered around the forest floor, and frightening sounds of screaming and human-like tortured cries for help. We'd heard and known about the pine forest since we were little kids, but somehow we had never had the guts to visit it. Until one day, we got pretty bored of visiting the other haunted places in our town. We had never seen any ghosts, and the pine forest came across our minds when we decided to give it a shot. At first, we seemed a bit reluctant, but then we all agreed that we needed something a little bit scarier to do as we're all in our early 20s. It was a foggy and wet night when we drove our way up to the forest. From the moment that I got in the car, I felt like something's not right. I could just tell that it wasn't. But I didn't want my friends to think that I was afraid, so I showed off a little bit talking about scary possibilities that might happen there in the pine forest. When we finally arrived, the road had divided the forest. It was so dark and cold. We parked in front of an abandoned building and then made our way into the pine trees. Everybody walked so fast and nobody even said a word. The forest was so dark and frightening. We kept walking for minutes until we finally saw the bow. We sat down and gathered and started talking and telling ghost stories and scary legends related with the pine forest. We started talking about those who have died here. When my friend Bobby was telling his story, suddenly I saw a quick movement in the corner of my eye. I turned around and whatever it was already gone. At first, I thought it could be some animals wandering around in the forest, but then we heard scratching voices coming from the top of the bow, as if there was something up there dragging its body up to it. I looked up, and I could make out a vague dark silhouette of a man standing there, looking down at us. I started shaking all over, and my friends were now all looking at me. Bobby had seen it too. He grabbed my shoulder tight and whispered, "Who's that?" I was just too afraid to break the silence. "Let's get out of here," said Bobby in a low tone. But we were so scared, we got petrified. Bobby was the first to get on his knees. "We better get back out of here now," he whispered, and then started walking. We all followed him silently. As soon as the bow was out of sight, we started running as fast as we could. For a moment there, I thought the dark figure was coming after us. I was really afraid. I kept praying to God while running. When we finally saw our car, my friend Dickie told us that he had left the key in the forest. We all started cursing him, but then we decided to break into the abandoned house and stayed inside until morning, though it was really dark in there. That night, none of us could sleep. We spent the night feeling frightened in a tiny room in the house. It was a squeeze, but we didn't care. At around 2 a.m., we heard light footsteps somewhere in the left wing of the house. We squeezed closer and tighter, holding our breath. As the sound of the footsteps became louder and louder, I closed my eyes tight and plugged both my ears with my index fingers, and then I felt the presence in the room with us, but I kept my eyes and ears shut. I was too afraid. I got the tingling sensation as if somebody standing pretty close to me. It lasted for about 30 minutes. I could feel my friend squeezing my body from all sides. When I finally got tired, I got my hands off my ears and embraced myself, but I kept my eyes shut still. We sat on the floor there in the dark, tiny room for about 4 hours, but it felt as if we had been there for ages. At around 6 a.m., we finally got out of the house. The sky had looked a little brighter. When the sun finally rose, we went back to the forest to get to the key, and then we drove back to town as soon as we could. Nobody talked. We still couldn't believe our luck. We finally made it back home safe and sound. Even until today, I still get the goosebumps whenever I think about that terrifying night in the pine forest. I sure as hell will never go back there, even if it was the last safe place on Earth, and I definitely won't be trying to hunt any ghosts anymore. I am a member of a newly created paranormal investigation team, based here in my hometown. It all started when our group of about 10 or so friends decided to go over to Waverly Sanatorium in Kentucky. That's what got us started in the first place. Over the next few weeks, some of our group members kind of fizzled out and didn't hang around as much, but there are about 5 or 6 of us that's still going strong, including myself. My first solo experience with a spirit happened at one of our group's founders' house. There are 3 founders, me and 2 of my friends, and this is our normal hangout spot on the weekends. A little history about the house as we were in at the time. My friend's stepbrother and his mom used to live in that house. His mom is now passed on, rest her soul. She was into the Wicca and witchcraft realm. She would hold seances in graveyards, do different rituals in the house. They lived in with no regard for what would happen. Me and my friends, 2 girls and 4 or 5 guys, were hanging out over at the house. Nothing really happens in the house while a big group is there, but the girls were ready to go home. So my friend, who owned the house, was going to take them home. We had the idea for me to stay back on my own, first mistake, and do an EVP session in the house, which of course, being the tough guy I am, I said sure. They leave. I say goodbye to the girls and see them off. This is where it gets trippy. I go back into the house to do the EVP session. The recorder is lying on the table by the door, and the kitchen is on the far side of the room as you walk in. It's a rather long living room that leads to the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. That's pretty much the house, other than the attic, which is a big no-no to go up there alone. So, I walked to the kitchen and grabbed me a drink. When I came back in the house, it felt a lot heavier. It just felt different from when everybody else was here earlier. As I am coming back from the kitchen to grab the recorder, I felt like I had to stop in the middle of the living room, so I did. I stared down the hall and I knew something was there. I could just feel it. Then I hear 4 footsteps walk right up to me and stop. At this point, I was pretty freaked out. Then it was like someone stomped their right foot in front of me, where this thing should be standing. That was enough for me. I hightailed it across the street to this other house and sat on the porch until they got back. I waited for maybe 20 minutes. When they returned, they thought I was still in the house. When they saw me come off the porch and I told them what happened, my friend said I looked physically shaken and I had no color in my face. This is a half hour after it happened. I swore to my buddy that I would never be alone in that house again. I don't do so much as sit in the driveway and wait for him to get home. I sit at the Crystals down the road. To this day, he thinks that it was his stepmother's mom. But I think it was someone else. It sounded like a man to me. But we can sit across the road and watch the lights turn on in the house at night, and us as a group to turn them off because after what happened that night, it freaked us all out. Our other co-founder of the group swears he kept seeing a little girl all around the living room, mostly standing behind him and myself. I think that the reason there are spirits there and wanted me out was that they didn't know who I was, and I think that the stepbrother's mom is still attached to the 3-foot-tall China doll that is still kept in the house. With that and an old newspaper is all that I found left of hers. Everything else was thrown out, which I'm sure helped nothing. This is one of my first and only really creepy experiences while ghost hunting,